there we are. Is back again. It is 9:30, and we're going to continue for the next half hour by taking a look at one of the more famous elements of Lewis, and that is its racing background. Up until the mid-1960s, there was something like 60 to 70 racing stables here, a thriving and very popular race course, and lots of ancillary businesses. That all came to a screeching end when the racecourse failed to get a certificate because there was no electricity up there. There was no running water. All the amenities needed for a modern racecourse, even though officially the course had been there until from 1720 or thereabouts. And some people said it was even around about 1700. There is evidence there was a race course there then. It's a great favourite of the Prince Regent, who used to come to Lewis and stay here before he became King George IV. And all in all, it was a vital part of the town. All that changed in, I think it's 1964, when the course was closed down and the last day of racing took place. But in the meantime, those people who have read Graham Greene's Brighton Rock will recall the chapter on the fight between the police and the racecourse gangs who made life a misery in the day. The Peaky Blinders, if you like, if you follow that series at all on BBC. Is it BBC? Yes. Peaky Blinders. And they dominated the racecourses. They cast terror into the hearts of racegoers because they would appear and they would rob bookmakers and wealthy punters. And if there's another gang there, they would start to fight, and the racegoers would find themselves in the middle of a raging gang battle. Anyway, the fact of the matter is that that story of the battle on Brighton Racecourse in Brighton Rock, Graham Greene's Brighton Rock, took place in or on the Lewis Racecourse, and it signaled the end of the gang's reign of terror after some very brave Lewis policemen, who only two in number, took on the gangs, locked them up, brought them to court, and such was the power of the gangs that they actually busloaded people in to stand outside the court and try to terrorize the judge and the court officials into letting these gangsters go. Well, they didn't, and they were locked up. And the mobsters realized that their power was on the wane. Good story. Let's put it in perspective, shall we? Yes, that's. Oh, it's gone and disappeared on me. Yes.
Vroom, vroom. The other day I felt a warmth between myself and Mole and Ratty, the two little characters from Wind in the Willows, as I sat on the banks of the River Ouse and let it drift by. Vroom, vroom. Today I feel more like Toad of Toad Hall, the animal that was always getting himself into trouble because of his excesses. Vroom!
But horsepower is the essence of this episode, because horses played a central part in the history of Lewes. And as might be expected, were often at the centre of violence,
Adding to the history of a bloody town.
Horses, of course, were nothing unique to Britain. Cavalry had been a major part of warfare, and peaceful farming from time to time immemorial. But for Lewes in early times, they were an important part of its economy. The Domesday Book, the first ever audit of England in 1086, records that anyone selling a horse in Lewes should pay to the reeve or estate manager a penny. The buyer also paid a penny. So a horse tax was in place more than 1,000 years ago. And so the horse took centre stage from the earliest of Norman times. I've shown you the tilting grounds where knights on horseback tried to unseat each other. But that was nothing compared to the violence that Lewes races brought to the town.
But I get ahead of myself. Lewes was one of the most famous racecourses in history until 1965.
The fourth oldest in the country, racing began in 1727, although some argue there is evidence it was 26 years before that.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Lewes. It's the final race meeting here at Lewes, Monday, September the 14th, 1964. The ground is firm and the wind is straight across the course. The runners for the first race, the Cuckmere Apprentices Handicap, are on their way to the start. Saucy Lad representing Tom Masson in the purple with the gold star. Number 11 is Nimberg. And away they go. They're off and racing, and Buzz made a bright start there and leads in the early stages. And now a little bit of a rise as they race past the mile marker and head towards the right-hand turn, which will bring them into the home straight. Closing stages with less than 100 yards left to travel. It's Buzz pulling clear, and Buzz goes on to win by about 3 lengths to Misty River in second, Saucy Lad back in third, Great Lady, Nimberg Wave, Methane, the Wolf, and St. Kieran.
In that year, after almost 300 years of horse racing, it closed down for good, mainly because it had no electricity, no running water, in fact, no facilities at all. Yet in the late 18th century, it attracted royalty, the big gamblers of the day, and it produced some champion racehorses over the years that brought great races and great feats to an otherwise pretty but blustery track atop the Downs. Considered by racing folk as the greatest racehorse of all time, Eclipse raced there in 1769. The Derby winner of 1793, Waxy, was a Lewes-trained horse, as was Charlottetown in 1966. Great jockeys rode there, such as Lester Piggott and Gordon Richards.
And Barry, you've, although it started in 1720 or so, you weren't here then, but you were, as a very young boy, involved in this racecourse.
Yeah, I certainly was, yeah. I'd say I was born on race day, 29th of August 1950. My mum's side of the family were all racing people, going back hundreds of years probably, so, you know, my gran used to take us up here.
It's very quiet and serene today, so what was it like on race days up here?
Very, very noisy. Hustle and the bustle of coaches coming up here, cars. I mean, all these places over here were car parks. You had all the horse boxes, the tote men, tic-tac men shouting the odds and everything else. Lots of entertainment going on, you know, and it was very, very busy. A 4-mile race, which started right down the bottom of the hill there, the horses used to run right round there as far as you can see, and come back down here to the winning post. They used to have 2 winning posts. They used to have a 5 furlong winning post and a 6 furlong winning post. But what they wanted to, what they did, they made the 6 furlong winning post another furlong away from the stands, because they both wanted to start them on the straight. Otherwise it was unfair, so they had a straight run.
Right.
In 1914, I think it was 14, they shut that down because they found it was too dangerous. And not only that, for the horses to get up that hill. They used to start them from here, they run them down there, round the loop and back again. And that made 4 miles, but it had to be like the best out of 3 or something.
Right.
So some of them horses run 12 miles
Yeah.
just to win a race. They had 10 minutes break. They got back after about 9 or 10 minutes. They'd have a bucket of water, drink and wash down, and back they used to go again. After a while, it just phased out a little bit. It used to be a 3-day meeting in August, and then it got to, it was just going to be a day a year. And it got to the stage where it was just one race, and all the horses in that race were trained in Lewes. And the guy that wrote about it, you know, he said this is probably going to be the last day.
There are many in Lewes who are still resentful that the course was closed. It brought a good deal of cash to the town. Lewes had many racing stables, and a thriving racing community numbered as many as 60 establishments.
But perversely, it was responsible for cleaning up the sport, despite suffering a bout of violence.
The early part of the 20th century saw the rise of vicious gangs around the country. These gangs often fought each other. But to keep cash in their pockets, they targeted racecourses. They would secretly ease their way into courses and then meet up to viciously attack and rob bookies. Racegoers, and even jockeys. They were feared at race meetings throughout Britain. And so it was on a June afternoon in 1936. London villain James Spinks and his gang turned up at Lewes for an attack on bookies. They gathered, some 30 strong, on the edge of the racecourse, ready to pounce. And pounce they did. They attacked and savagely beat a bookie and managed to rob him.
But not known to them, 2 CID officers had been posted in the grounds.
The 2 detectives alerted their fellow coppers and raced towards the gang. According to some reports, a rival gang got into the act and all hell broke loose. It must have been some sight. Villains scattering in all directions. Keystone cops were in full chase, and the excited racegoers panicked and dived for cover. But it was the police on this day at Lewes Racecourse who passed the winning post. They managed to nick 16 of the gang, took them to Lewes, where they were sentenced to long prison terms. That put an end to the decades-old practice of course hijacking by these fearless and vicious gangs.
A real feather in the cap of the Lewes coppers. Nabbed.
Pulling you aside, locals will whisper in your ear that Graham Greene's Brighton Rock was really about Lewes Racecourse. They say the gang fight in his novel was based on the events of Lewes in 1936. To think that Pinky strode this course, what a ghost to have here now. Pinky wasn't in the pub, that's for sure, but I bet you he wouldn't have bought me a drink anyway. Talking of betting, the Prince Regent helped pack the crowds into Lewes Racecourse. The high and the mighty liked rubbing shoulders with him, and the humble and lowly liked rubbernecking. Accurate figures weren't kept in those early days, estimates vary, the crowds reached between 10 and 20,000 spectators. That was on special race days. The course also provided national champions, and one horse is buried here along with his rider, galloping the old Lewes racecourse in perpetuity. But the love of horses by the Prince Regent could well have resulted in his early demise. He was a betting man and a daredevil. As I've mentioned, the future king drove a coach and four down this street. There is no written evidence that the story is strong enough for this sign to be erected by the local council. The prince was often in Lewes, and a renowned gambler was part of his inner circle. Sir John Larday, a successful racehorse owner, lived in Lewes, was colourful, resided on the High Street, and was a gambler and horseman. His wife Letitia was equally as colourful. Accomplished coach driver, she had been the mistress of a convicted highwayman. The Prince, Sir John and their circle were notorious enough from their lifestyle as it was. But hell-raising Sir John went down in history for a wager in Brighton. He bet a larger and heavier man that he could carry him piggyback over Steen. When the man showed up, Larday insisted the man stripped naked because the bet didn't include carrying his clothes. This was the street that the Prince Regent drove his coach and four down. I tried walking up it. That's tough enough, but coming down is oh, impossible! So speculation has it that it was Larday, or perhaps even his fascinating wife, who urged the prince to make the bet. History records that he won the bet, not on any betting slip, but because the prince went on to become King George IV. In an earlier episode, we took a look at the castle tilting ground. Tilting, or trying to knock an opponent off a horse, was originally military training. But later it became sport. Knights won large purses in tournaments and won accolades from ladies for their prowess. Ordinary folk couldn't compete. They were forced to be spectators, but they had their own violent sport in the form of folk football. This precursor to our modern game raged across the countryside with whole villages chasing a pig's bladder. It was so violent that kings from the 13th to the 17th century tried to ban it. But I digress. Tilting, of course, involved horses. And it was a sport that eventually gave way to a calmer pastime. The Lewes tilting ground became a bowling green in 1640. Not a horse in sight. But typical of Lewes, it still plays the game the way Sir Francis Drake played it. And it is said gave inspiration to Tom Paine to write his Rights of Man after playing here. The horse has never really disappeared from history. Fox hunting is recorded in Sussex in the late 18th century. But in Lewes, a traditional meeting of huntsmen on Boxing Day didn't begin until the early 20th century. Now, each year, the Southdown and Erridge huntsmen gather on Boxing Day ready to ride to hounds. As you might expect, this occasion has contributed to violence on Lewes High Street. Protesters have turned up for decades to protect the killing of foxes. It is now, of course, against the law to kill foxes this way. But it doesn't stop the protesters. Lewes is still a rural country town, so thousands turn out to cheer the riders down the high street. Clashes are inevitable, and each year they occur. No deaths, but the odd bloody nose, as being in a bloody tiny town.
When the hunt meets outside and there are loads of protesters in balaclavas and so on, who strides out with a stirrup cup, the tray held in the air, and offers a drink to the huntsman? It's Cliff. How does it feel going out to face the mob?
Well, I suppose it can be quite scary at times, but I kind of feel that it's very necessary to keep the tradition going, as the master of the house has done this for about 150 years or so. And I've just trotted out for the 29th year, the 29th time, with the stirrup cup for the South Down Ridge hunt.
So and you always do it. It's always you. Yeah.
It's something God willing, I'd like to keep going.
Well, you've got a cheering section in me, because I'm always there saying, "Go, Cliff, go." I think it doesn't matter which side I take. It's a very brave thing to go out, and tradition is tradition, and it should be maintained.
I totally agree with that. And there's about 3,000 people out there cheering you on, so it's rather nice.
Now, when we're talking about horses, I mean, this is an old coaching inn.
Yes, well, it became an inn, a coaching inn, about 300 years ago. And I was doing a little study some years ago when I was looking at previous owners from that time. And within that 300-year period, I just found out that I'm the longest standing owner in the whole period, in the whole time. Yeah. So, with 28 years to my name.
For many years, this town, like many in England, had horse-drawn vehicles of bread and milk delivered by horse-drawn cart. But remember the past and 63 pubs in Lewes. Yes, you've guessed it, so was beer. And it still is. So deep is the horse embedded in Lewes society that the remaining town brewery, Harvey's, still delivers its products in a horse-drawn dray. And it tastes all the better for it. Well, every other Tuesday you deliver in a very traditional way, do you not?
We do. We have our horse and dray wandering around the streets of Lewes. It's not very kind to horses, very steep hill, but they manage very well. And it's a marvellous attraction. I mean, it's a good tourist attraction, and I think the town have taken the horses to their hearts.
Well, I think that's very true. Yeah, I mean, they're magnificent creatures.
So I'm closing this episode on a relatively modern phenomenon. Horse whispering. This technique, made famous in a Hollywood movie, is often seen as a modern technique. But horse whispering has been around for centuries. They just didn't boast about it. That was because they were thought to be witches. Witches were executed in a variety of ways. But after a French horse whisperer in the 18th century was burned at the stake along with his horse, others kept quiet. There's no record that horse whisperers were ever burned in Lewes. We were too busy burning humans. But the craft stayed below the surface. Because Lewes was known for being a town of witchcraft. That's a story for another day. But whispering is alive and well in Lewes. The horse. A part of Lewes history from Saxon times to this very day.
We've talked horses today, how the Lewes Hunt tears down the High Street on Boxing Day, how the Prince Regent risked his neck by driving a coach and four down Keir Street, and how the old Lewes racecourse at one time flourished, but today is lost, thankfully not forgotten. Oh, exhausting. I feel like a drink. No pub up here. Whoa!
Microphone on. There you are. Fascinating story that the town was absolutely flooded with people on race days, and actually because councils were in those days much the same as they are today, rather pompous and don't have any imagination. The fact that the roads were jammed on those days upset them, rather than seeing the benefits that racing could bring to the town. And as a consequence, racing died in Lewes. Very sad it is too. There are still a couple of stables up at the old racecourse. The buildings are being converted to homes and other types of buildings. So there's the odd place around town that still has associations with racing. But generally speaking, from a very big and thriving industry, it was reduced to virtually nothing. And although I'm one of those people that keeps on urging to have perhaps one race day a year in which you would have a sprint on what's left of the race course, or a series of sprints, a race day. It's like when you do away with the trains. It is difficult to get things back because things change. People build on the race course, taking part of it away. Others get very, very possessive about some of the land leading up to the race course, and others simply just killjoys. And so it is very difficult indeed. But now, hopefully, we're going to have Melissa here. But for the moment, I'm actually going to just to remind everybody who we are and what we do. There are some things that yeah. Normally, when I look for these things, I can find all sorts of and of course, when I want them, they're not there. It's always the way. It is always the way. Don't ask me why. It's Sod's law. It's one of those things that that we Uh, let's try this. Wow. That was my that was my New Year's Eve dinner, and I spent it on my own, and I was determined that I was going to pass stories, and I can oh hi. I can hear the beer being poured there. I'm asked to taste it, but it's Friday, and it's normally a Tuesday I'm asked to taste it. So something's wrong somewhere. I can assure you it is quality control. And Kevin and his team have got it all under. Sorry, your name is Ollie. Ollie, yes, he's got Ollie. You're his grandson, aren't you? Yeah. Kevin's brought in his grandson today, and he's getting a little bit of a lesson in how to look after the beer. And he's got a great big smile on his face, so I'm quite sure he's enjoying it. And he seems to be a dab hand at it. So there you are. So now I think that we'll because Melissa has not appeared, and sometimes it's difficult when it's in New York, and particularly if the weather is bad and so on and so forth. We have some problems, but I had selected something for you, and it was. I will have a little bit of a go at finding it. Because it's one of those programs that is always pretty good. Here it is. And essentially, we, over the past couple of years or so, have interviewed a number of great characters in around town on behalf of Action Cancer. And the way that we selected them was that Leslie Hills is like us in her 80s, painted all sorts of characters to support Action Cancer. Now, one of those paintings is of a gentleman called John Henty, who is a great character around Lewes, been here forever, it would seem, and who is a broadcaster and an entrepreneur to some extent, of some note. So let's go to Leslie and Melissa White. and John Henty. Coming up now.
Behind me you can see the cancer research shop windows, but they are unusually empty. Any other year you would be seeing Leslie Hills painting right here. She is painting the people of Lewes. They are many recognisable faces. Today we're speaking to one of these people behind the paintings.
How long have you got? Entire programme, I think. Well, Leslie's a super lady and very much a part of this town, which I like to think I am. And I used to see her in the windows, and I noticed all the wonderful portraits there of famous people, obviously. But basically, Leslie was a friend. I used to pop into her shop, the cancer research shop, and we got to know each other. And I think she suggested that perhaps I had a portrait, and I thought, well, not a bad idea. Why not? Bit of fun, and it's raising money for a good cause, cancer research or RNLI. So I said, yeah, fine, okay. I didn't do a sitting or anything like that, and it's wearing that scarf. So yeah, I was very pleased to do that. It's a bit of an ego trip as well, but why not? And all the other side of it, obviously, people with their pets and children and, you know, memories, which are terribly, terribly important. I was born in 1936, which is a long time ago, but it was a very good year because we had 3 kings, the Crystal Palace burnt down in London, and I was born in Croydon, which is South London, in Thornton Heath, which is even more South London. So that was me, born in 1936, only child. Mum had the baby in a nursing home, because in those days women did do that sort of thing. And of course it was just before the Second World War. So what I remember of the Second World War is very little, except for one thing, and that is that as a small child, as a baby, I used to be fed banana mashed up with cream and sugar. And obviously the war meant there were no more bananas. And so as far as I was concerned, I wasn't really too bothered about Adolf Hitler and what was going on. I was far too young, but I was very concerned that there were no bananas. And on one occasion, I was in Southbourne in Bournemouth, which is, we were evacuated there, the family. And the greengrocer was serving in the Far East, and he brought home some bananas, and he raffled those bananas. And one of them was won by my girlfriend at the time, who was called Mary. Mary knew that I liked bananas and offered the banana to me. And would you believe it, I actually refused to have it, because I had read somewhere that Adolf Hitler was dropping identifiable objects into the streets, which, when you picked them up, exploded. So I thought that she was handing me an exploded bomb as a banana. But finally I did accept it, and then I had to decide whether to mash it or whether to slice it up. And that was a big decision at the age of about 7. I went to a school in Croydon. The careers master, on one wet day similar to today, went round the class and said, what do you want to be, Martin? Well, I'm going into banking, sir. Right, that's good, fine, said Percy Ewins. Dean, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to run a cafe, sir, fine. Henty, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to broadcast. And then the bell rang at the end of the class. And so that was the only career advice I received, nil. So it was a bit frustrating. I did national service. I served in the Royal Air Force. 2728589 is my number. If there is a Third World War, I will probably be serving the Queen with my Olivetti, because I was a typist. in the Air Force for 2 years. Came out of the Air Force, went back to my first job, which was Shell Petroleum. I worked for Shell because my father worked for Shell. I got very fed up with it because I was a number. I wanted to be an individual. I've always believed in the individual. I decided that the best thing to do would be to get into journalism. So I applied to a newspaper in Croydon in 1958-9. I was accepted by the Croydon Advertiser and I became a reporter on that newspaper. But after that, only 6 months later, I had a rich uncle in America, or at least I thought he was rich. His name was Uncle Harry, and he was a horse polo trainer for the Santa Barbara Polo Club, which is big time on the west coast of America. So I wrote to Uncle Harry and I said, would he support me if I came over? I wanted to learn about radio in America. Foolishly, he said he would. I wasn't able to work in broadcasting because I wasn't a member of the union. So I used to do English voices. I was quite good at this, very nice. I'd say, why don't you go down to Chuck's Motorola and TV on State Street? They've got an amazing bargain. John, that's very good. Could you do that again, John? So that went very well, but ultimately I got homesick. I missed my girlfriend at the time, so I decided to come home. And I came home, and would you believe it, I went back to the Croydon Advertiser, and that's quite enough up until 1962. There's more. Well, all right, 1962, the job came up with an airline called British European Airways, BEA. Famous airline at the time, now part of BOAC or British Airways. And so I applied for the job as a feature writer with BEA, got the job, and for 5 years, an amazing 5 years in the 60s, when I accompanied the Beatles to Stockholm, Sean Connery and James Bond to Istanbul, Fall from Russia with Love, Hayley Mills to Crete, an amazing job for 5 years. Why did it end? It ended because the BBC decided to open local radio throughout the UK, and that's how we get into broadcasting. I applied for a job and amazed myself and everybody else by getting the job as sports producer for BBC Radio Brighton, which of course is not too far from the lovely town of Lewes, and we covered Lewes by radio throughout my entire career there. I was 10 years full-time staff at BBC Radio Brighton. In fact, one of the first presenters, and my main programme was at 5:30 in the morning. Now you're going to say, who the heck is watching or listening to the radio at 5:30? And the answer is older people perhaps, who can't sleep, may be in pain, feeling alone, fed up with the situation, whatever the situation. And there was the Early Bird Show, which was at 5:30 until 6:30, and it was a very friendly little programme. We had a mascot worm called Whirly, who used to talk to people. Hello, Whirly. Hello. How are you? I'm not very well. You're not very well, Whirly. Why is that? I'm tired. You're tired? I'm sorry about that. Are you going to go to bed? No. Why not? I don't like that. That sort of thing. That went on and on and on, and people had photographs of Whirly the worm. And the other thing we actually adopted a duck to raise money for a wildfowl trust. And so we had a competition to see who could name the duck. And the winning entry was called Mrs. Feather, which is quite a nice name for a duck. Why did the programme end? Because the BBC couldn't afford to pay me £70 a week to get up at £70 a week to get up at 5:30 in the morning. So they decided to axe the programme. There were protests. In point of fact, there were petitions outside the building, letters to Mrs. Thatcher at the time. But of course it had no good whatsoever, and so the programme ended and I vanished off the airwaves. But what I did was I moved wisely to Lewes. I built my own radio studio in a garage, and we produced programmes for hospital radio throughout the United Kingdom for 6 years, and they had star guests like Petula Clark, you name it, we had star guests on this program, and I've still got every single one of those audio cassettes, and equally on an MP3. I like MP3s, tiny little memory stick, put it in, press a button, and I can see any of those programs or listen to any of those programs with all the star names. I'm running out of voice. People in the street, the good thing about radio is people don't recognise you. I was recognised once when I was going to Brighton railway station, crossing the road just to get to the station, and there was a guy from St Dunstan's for visually impaired people, blind servicemen. And seeing that he was about to cross the road, I said, are you okay? Can you want any help? And he said, no, I'm fine, John. Now, this was a blind man, but the point is you recognise the voice. That's the nice thing about radio. Now, radio was very personal in those days, and that's why, in a way, people sort of reacted well to it. People say, have you changed, John? And I say, no, I haven't changed at all. But what has changed is radio itself. It's become obviously far more sort of news orientated. It's got to have the weather, it's got to have fitted slots, and also tight programs of music. I could do anything I liked for that 1 hour, basically because the manager at the radio station wasn't listening to the program, so he had absolutely no idea what was going on. On one occasion, I actually did the program naked, but the good thing about radio was nobody could tell. You see, it was a very warm day, I have to say. And you might say, well, what about other members of staff? Weren't they affronted? And I said, well, there weren't other members of the staff, because I used to open the radio station, actually front door, go in, pick up the weather, and ring up the bus station to find out about the buses and the trains. And I was on my own for at least the first 45 minutes. So radio has changed. There's far more of it now. Commercial radio, of course, I wasn't commercial radio. And I'm a little disappointed with the way that it went. But that's change, isn't it? Everything has to change. When I was working in radio, one or two listeners wanted a record played, and instead of phoning in, which is how things are done, they would write it. Very often you wrote in and said, could I have Engelbert Humperdinck singing, or the Beatles singing? And to get their postcard or letter to my attention, or anybody's attention, they would occasionally put them on postcards. And some of the postcards were Mabel Lucy Atwell postcards. She was famous as a postcard illustrator. And I used to say, for want of something to say, my goodness, you've got another Mabel Lucy card here. They're really nice. She was so charming, wasn't she? Everybody thought that was good. I decided to find out who the hell Mabel Lucy Atwell was. Did she exist? Was she Walt Disney in disguise, you know? So I actually found her family. I travelled across to her family, who lived outside Marlborough in Wiltshire. I met her daughter, Peggy, and Peggy did an interview with me that was on Woman's Hour, which is a programme on the BBC, Radio 4. And it told this story that had never been told before on radio. A remarkable story about this amazing woman, Mabel Lucy Atwell, who is an example to all women. The best example of that, really, is that as a young girl, she was never encouraged to do anything other than look after the boys in the family. It's a very big family in the East End of London. She used to do little sketches, and encouraged by one of her sisters, she sent one or two sketches to Raphael Tuck, who are big postcard producers in London. She signed the letter in around 1899, probably, M.L. Atwell. And they wrote back and said, "Dear sir, well done, we do like some of these sketches, please send us some more." And it took at least a year before they discovered, and by then it was too late, that they weren't dealing with a man, shock horror, they were dealing with a woman. From that point onwards, she never looked back. I'd written for Viva Lewis, the magazine, for 10 years, little jocular, funny little bits, a bit like the Early Bird Show. And people liked it and banged into people in the street, which was nice, chatted to them, brief little conversations, all reported in there. And over those 10 years, I met some very interesting people and did some very interesting things. So I thought, well, I might as well sum it all up in those 10 years, do a little book, and then try and raise a bit of money for the Friends of Lewes Victoria Hospital, which is very important to this town. And suddenly there was this little other magazine available, but free. I gave it away, obviously. But if people liked it, then they could donate some money to the Lewes Victoria Hospital, and happily we raised well over £500, and it's still doing very well. I must say that it's still available online, believe it or not. How you find it, I haven't got a clue. I'm not very high tech. I'm not digital. There used to be a really nice car boot sale in Lewes on a Sunday. And occasionally I would see Raymond Briggs down there and have the occasional chat. And I thought potential here. He produced a book about all the pieces he writes for a magazine called the Oldie Magazine, which is for old people like me. So I thought, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll write to him and say, could I sort of abridge some of these articles and maybe turn them into a play? A radio play. And as I said, it's a long story, but basically he approved. He said, as long as I'm not involved, he said, you can do it. And again, we raised money for charity, and we put on 2 shows, and we were planning to put on another show in Lewes, but unfortunately the circumstances have changed and we can't do that. And it was a very, very funny little radio play all about this quite remarkable man, Raymond Briggs. So Raymond Briggs, Mabel Lucy Atwell, Max Miller. And going back to the point I made much earlier, they were all individuals. You know, my message to anybody is, anybody can be ordinary. Try and be extraordinary. It helps. Cut.
Well, there we are, John Henty, and he's from one broadcasting legend to another, because here she is, all the way from New York, is Melissa Conti. And good morning, Melissa.
Good morning, Keith. How are you?
I am not too bad at all, and delighted that you actually came in just at that point, because I don't know whether you met John Henty when you were here, but if not, the next time you're here, you most certainly must. Absolute character, but also I would say his career is more or less in concert with yours and mine, and he's been there, done that, and over the same period of time, approximately, except he's much older than even me. So now, let us ask you, are you still snowbound?
No, actually, we really haven't had much snow at all. I don't even think any of the snow that we've had, maybe 2 days, none of it stuck on the ground because the ground was too warm. So actually, it's been pretty mild the last couple of days. Let's see, Celsius maybe 5 to 11 degrees Celsius. Not terrible. And so it's actually been nice, and I hope today is nice as well.
Right, now, first of all, as you know, I always like, and when I was saying to people promoting that you were coming on a little later, I said that one of the important things is that you give us some idea of what, if you like, Americans do on a day-to-day basis. So since you spoke to us this time last week, what have you been doing for the last 7 days?
Okay, last 7. Okay, well, working, like you do, get up and make our beds, maybe. Go to work. I've started actually working out. I've been running with my son, who's training for the Marine Navy, whatever. And so I've got up to about a half a mile, continuous. I'm like, wow. So I'm proud of myself, and I pat myself on the back. And I'm preparing for a couple of parties this weekend, kind of a belated birthday party. And then we have a Super Bowl party, because it's our big Super Bowl weekend.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the past. I guess back in like the very late 1980s, I worked for the Associated Press, and I just happened to be working in Kansas City. And they had asked me to cover a football game. Now, American football. I didn't know anything about it. And there I was covering a major football team known as the Kansas City Chiefs. And I knew about baseball. I understood baseball, but football. So I had to have my editor. I called up my editor friend frantically. I was like, "You got to help me. I don't understand any of this." So she explained it all to me because she was a big football fan. And then I was able to actually cover the game. But I covered the afternoon version of the paper, which is more feature-like. So you feature the main player in the game. And I'm telling you, it was crazy. But then I really got to enjoy it. And guess who is now competing in our Super Bowl? The Kansas City Chiefs.
Chiefs.
So, while I may not know those same players, I'm rooting for the Chiefs on Sunday. So.
Well, now, I'm glad you reminded me because it's on some extraordinarily late hour on Sunday. Played on Sunday, isn't it?
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Here we are. Say hello to Melissa.
Yeah, hello. Hello. Yeah. She's in New York, yeah?
She's in New York.
How
yes.
New York, not cold?
She says that the snow hasn't settled yet.
Oh, no good. See you later.
See you in a little while.
I died in the seafood.
That's our, for those of you who are new to this program, that's our Russian lady who is in the hotel, and then she comes and she's bent on two things: making sure that I'm fed properly and that I find a wife.
Oh, she was so sweet. I met her when I was there. She was there with her husband. I think it was their anniversary.
That's right.
Sweet.
Yeah.
She was so nice.
Real character. Both of them are real characters, and they come in about twice a week, and come and say hello, and we encourage people to just barrel in and come on the air. So, but back to the Super Bowl, because look at me, and you know how old I am. I actually saw the very first Super Bowl on the television way back in, it would have been 1960 some odd.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, I actually was coaching an English rugby side. And of course, all the Canadians follow the Super Bowl religiously, but nobody really knew what it was all about. And there'd been a merger of the two leagues, one in the East and one in the West. And this was the very first culmination of it. So I didn't really understand quite what the excitement was about. But as time went by, so I realized that I've always followed American football. I enjoy it as a game. I think that it's an interesting game. But when I was working in Northern Ireland, there was a bar that we would go to. It was run by a man called Ciccarino, Peter Ciccarino. So the bar obviously was just called Chicks. And he, as an American, would get a big screen in. And so we followed the Super Bowl in Northern Ireland as well. That was when you had to get up at or stay up until 2:00 in the morning. It was only brought in on the odd one here and there. Yes, I've had a reasonable association with the Super Bowl, and I certainly will watch it tonight. But my team was the San Francisco 49ers. And when I was, I'm going back now to 1958, and the American football was shown on on a Sunday afternoon, and they had an advertiser for some processed meat, and it would always be meanwhile back at the ranch. So when they took their commercial break, it was always meanwhile back at the ranch. And the San Francisco 49ers always featured, and they always lost. They were the worst team in the league. And when I started to watch in Northern Ireland, I said to Peter Ciccarino, who's playing? And he said the San Francisco 49ers, they're the worst team in the league. He said, no, they're not. They're going into the Super Bowl. So I envy you being right in the heart of it. Of course, there is one other great occasion in your northern neighbor, Canada, where their equivalent of the Super Bowl is called the Grey Cup, named after a former general. What do you call the man who is in charge of representing the Queen? Not the Secretary General. Anyway, he represents the Queen, and there was a famous one in the start of the 20th century. So the cup was named after him, the Grey Cup, and that also is a big whoop-de-doo and great fun. So American football is a terrific game, and it's got, it really provides a lot of pleasure over there. That's my little.
That a couple. It's one thing to be a fan of football, but most people, maybe they're not, but they really love to have a Super Bowl party. So it's about the food, and it's about the commercials. The commercials are very popular. Like the ad agencies and the companies, they put out their best ads during the Super Bowl. I'm not sure how much it costs now for a Super Bowl ad, whether it's $1 billion, I don't know, something like crazy.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? It is a matter of prestige, isn't it, for the person to be the featured artist. Yeah,
I think it's this year is Rihanna.
That's Kevin in the background, by the way. Whom I think you met when you were here, and who keeps us on the straight and narrow. And when things go wrong, he's there to put us right and so on. And in fact, we are slowly nudging towards where we're going to get Connor's beer down to Harvey's. We've taken one or two steps forward, so hopefully we'll consummate the thing this week. And when you come on next week, we'll be ready to do the program. But he always gets me to check out the beer. And strangely enough, I looked around this morning, and here was a sort of a 16-year-old, and it was Kevin's grandson who was actually testing the beer. But he knew to make sure I got it. So here's cheers to you and to Connor, which takes me on to the next thing. Bring us up to date on Connor's adventures.
Well, we made a new beer. It's like a Czech Pilsner. He does very, very well with that. And so maybe next week we'll have it ready. And he's just really studying for the Navy and for the Marines, and he's working out. He has to do a 4-minute plank, and he has to take a video and send it to the Marines. It's like they do these physical competitions. Like you have to stay in a plank position for 4 or 5 minutes. I mean, it's crazy. Or he has to run 7K.
Wow.
What?
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be easy.
Rather him than me.
You know, like, I don't even know. I don't even do 1K, maybe a half a K.
Nor me. As a matter of fact, I actually went to the hospital this week to see about my back, which actually stops me from going almost 100 yards at the moment. They think they might just be able to do something for me. So be careful when you get back here next in May, isn't it? You're coming. That you'll find that I can actually perhaps dash 10 yards.
That's good.
So now explain to everybody, because different people watch at different times, that he is joining the Marines, but in a specialist capacity, because he's going to fly faster than sound airplanes.
Yeah, he wants to be a naval aviator. So either the Navy or the Marines, and the last choice would be Air Force. So I guess he just loves the Navy culture or the Marine culture. So because what he says is it's more for the country, it's more of a brotherhood, whereas the Air Force is more of a job.
Mhm.
So he's more into that brotherhood, fighting World War III, hopefully not, kind of
Yeah.
an atmosphere, I guess.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. I don't know. It's a
Okay.
little frightening. But,
Incidentally, just as a personal aside, is I haven't heard from the Marines. They've got my name, have they not?
I'm sorry, what was that again, Keith?
I haven't heard from the Marines.
Oh, they haven't called you up yet?
No. So it's just so you know. Now, he's also a correspondent for NHK, the leading Japanese television network. How's that going?
He recently went to the funeral in Memphis of that gentleman who was killed in that attack with the police, and that was very sad. So he saw the vice president. Our vice president was there with the mother of the gentleman who was killed, and so he found that to be very moving and very sad. And then he's now going to be doing a story. He's actually leaving on Sunday. Apparently part of the state of Oregon wants to be part of the state of Idaho. And so it's more of I guess because they're mountains. So you've got the west coast, Oregon, and it's more cosmopolitan, it's more urban. And then you've got the east coast of Oregon, which is more rural, and they feel that they match up better with Idaho. So there's this movement about to split Oregon into two and have that part join Idaho, which is more of a rural community, more of a hands-off approach to government, because if you don't have much of a population, how much regulation do you really need?
Yeah.
You really don't. I mean, it's, what are you regulating? You're regulating the trees, so they don't want gun control. They don't want that at all. They're in a rural community. I mean, it makes sense. They go and they hunt, they fish. They're more, farmers, cattlemen, things of that nature. So it's very different atmosphere than it would be in an urban city environment like London, for example.
Right.
Very, very different lifestyle. And they don't want to be governed by the rules of a city. They're not a city.
Right.
So
now, how, generally speaking, is there a lot of resistance to this, or?
Well, certainly. It just has never happened really before. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
Very, very. I mean, there may be little parts I don't even remember in history. Maybe there is, and somebody can remind me. But very unusual. And I think it's a very, very. It's a very right wing type of a stance. But at the other, on the other hand, it kind of sort of makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So
well,
what would
it take? What would it take to split a state like that?
It would have to be that both legislatures would have to agree. Both state legislatures would have to agree. So
but then does it need to go to Washington to get the state split?
There may be some approvals, but I think it's really mainly up to the states. So the states have a lot of power. Unlike, say, for example, your counties may not have as much. They just don't have that power. States have a lot of rights. So
now, what you're saying is you're saying an awful lot of interest to me this morning. So forgive me if I'm chatting a bit more than I should. But while you and I were working together, and I was at Reuters, I came out with my team, Simon Brooksbank and Ali Cameron, to British Columbia, and we did a program on Arcadia. Does that ring a bell?
Remind me.
Right. the province of British Columbia, the state of Washington State, as opposed to Washington, D.C.,
Right.
and
right.
Oregon all got together and decided that there was a natural trading area there. And particularly because they were very keen to see if they could become the gateway to Russia. Of all things. And we actually saw the governor of Washington State, and we saw a representative of Oregon State, and of course one of my great friends who was a great backer of this was the late Grace McCarthy, who was Deputy Premier of British Columbia. And we did I think because it was such a complex issue, I think we did a program in 3 parts or something of the sort. But this idea of different associations and unions is not necessarily new. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. In the very beginning, it was just some fringe movement, and it's now picking up steam. So we'll see how things go.
Yeah.
It's
So-
a matter of people just not feeling like they're being represented or they're being considered because of the incredibly polarizing politics. It's almost like I win, you lose. That just doesn't bode well for a country. It just doesn't.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that critical though they may be of their governance, citizens need to feel that they're part of the right combination.
Right. Yeah. If you have a state with very high taxes, and you're not really getting the services that you're just not getting the services, because if it's going to the cities, it's going to the social services, it's going to the education. The rural communities really don't benefit, but they're paying the money. So there has to be something you have to consider everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. So will this be an ongoing story that Connor will be following for the Japanese, or is it just this is happening?
They seem to call on him. I think because he's very good interviewing people, and he understands the politics and the culture and the dynamics where the Japanese don't understand. So it's important to have somebody, if you are covering the United States, to understand the culture and to understand what things mean and to understand the form of government. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, is God forbid if he doesn't get into the cockpit of those jets, it's a good fallback position. I mean, it's a very responsible job he's got.
He finds it interesting to be a journalist. I don't think that he's, and the two of us, you have to have a real fire for it, because it's not the kind of job that gives you a life outside of journalism. So you have to just love it, right? And if you don't really love it, you're just doing it just because it's a job. It's not. Yeah, because he comes home at almost 10 o'clock at night, leaves at 7. It's just no life. There's no life.
No. But then you and I did that for long periods of our life.
But we loved it, though. We loved it.
Absolutely.
We were passionate about it.
Well, the interesting thing is that you and I still have mutual friends from those days when we worked together. Mark Landsman, who actually is, if I put something up on Facebook, Mark is the first to actually respond to it.
Oh, that's good.
He's lovely.
He was so great. He's just so great. What a great guy.
Yeah. And then there's a lovely guy called Bill Mode, who went to NASA, did he not? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's so great. Bill, he's such an intelligent, nice young man.
Yeah.
Nice person. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. He was indeed. Now, Turning to the bigger picture, I hadn't realized, and forgive me if I'm actually not looking at stuff in the proper way, but I understand that Donald Trump is going to tip his hat at the presidency again.
His party is basically on fire right now. They don't even know what they're doing. They don't know which side is up. I'm not that the Democrats do either, but there's so much division and infighting and drama. It just Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know. I just think he just needs to play golf. I don't know. He's such a like. What would he'd come in and what would he do? I don't know. I think he would just make the country even more and more divided. I just don't see how it's going to sustain itself. You know, you have to, when you're in that position, you're a public servant. You're serving your country. You're not trying to hurt your country.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, he doesn't see the bigger
picture. No, right. Well, I mean, perhaps he reflects a lot of the modern generation. That's me. He does what's good for him and not. I mean, I see in our present political groupings very much a similar situation. I keep on quoting President Kennedy: "Ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." The whole idea of duty has disappeared, and particularly from politics, not only from your politics, but from our politics. And until we start to get that feeling back, I think we're going to be in trouble. The Western world is going to be in trouble. And of course, what we do is we open up to people sort of saying, well, you know, look at Russia, look at China, they've got stability, and that washes with some people.
They have stability. Who said they had stability?
But we don't know. We
so
don't
much turmoil in those countries.
We keep it under wraps, whereas we have to tell the world.
Those countries are, the people in those countries are slaves. They're essentially serfs. They truly are. And they just allow their government to do whatever they want, whatever it wants to do, the people in power. And then they just sit back and what kind of a life is that?
Yes, but it is interesting though, as an observation. I mean, for instance, I worked in Armenia for a while, and there was still a lot of the older people, particularly, who said, "Oh, bring back the old Soviet Union. Life was so good under the Soviet Union." You know, I mean, it's all very well for us to sit down and say, "Oh no, it wasn't for you," and I say, "Yes, it was." You know,
well, it's all. You have to understand, it's all relative, Keith. It's all relative. So, you know, I was a slave back then. I was a content, happy little slave, and now I'm not so content. But you're still a slave.
Well, true.
So it's all relative. Because that's all they are. They can't really do anything. They're not allowed to. No. Self-expression? What? No such thing.
Yeah.
So while we may criticize this whole me, individualism, what do we want? Authoritarianism? We want communism? Whether you can't have your own sovereignty and make your own decisions?
Yes.
You don't have any rights?
I don't think a sense of duty to your community and your society is necessarily subscribing to authoritarianism. I think that it is a feeling that I must have and you must have to say we want to make this a healthy, wealthy, and attractive society.
You could have both. I mean, you could have individualism and individual rights, certainly, and care about your country because you're happy that this kind of country is giving you those rights. That's not the case in Russia. It's certainly not the case in China. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yes. I understand your argument. What I'm saying is that these feelings exist, and sometimes changing people's views, changing what they think, isn't as easy as sort of just.
Because it's ingrained in them, Keith. It's ingrained. It's what they grew up with. It's what they know. It's their story. They can't imagine anything else, just like the people of North Korea can't imagine anything else. And then when they are introduced to something outside of it, they're shocked. Mm-hmm. Oh, you do that in South Korea? Wow. Oh, you mean you're not against us? Wow.
Well, let's get back to the two political parties, because you only have two, and they seem entrenched. Do you see that? I mean, I always, as looking at it from outside, thought that Donald Trump arrived as president because the electorate were getting pretty fed up with the two established parties who are getting themselves into dreadful trouble. And they obviously haven't got themselves out of dreadful trouble. What's the next development as far as public concern is concerned?
I don't know. I think we always seem to bring ourselves back from the brink. It looks like we're on the brink right now, but it's just that when you're on the extreme of one side or you're on the extreme of the other, you don't have all the answers. You become so like, I mean, we'll take a look at you can look at both sides of the extremes. I mean, they both want a lot of control. It's just a different flavor of control. So with the Republican Party, it's more of a religious, personal activity, personal freedom control in some areas, not when it comes to gun rights. Whereas on the other side, the Democrats, they'll want more of those personal type freedoms, but then they don't want the gun rights. So it's, but it's once again, it's not considering everyone outside of them. The cities aren't considering the rural people aren't considering the cities. It's not looking at the country as a whole. What do we want for our country? Do we want to divide? We want to balkanize? I mean, seriously. Come on, guys. We need to get together and say, all right, we're not going to necessarily get everything we want, but we're going to get some of what we like and maybe some of what we don't like. But you can't have one side gets everything and the other side doesn't. Come on. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So I think eventually we'll come to we always seem to come back from the brink, so we'll see.
Now, when we're talking about politicians, I'm absolutely fascinated that a comedian becomes the president of his country and actually turns out to be one hell of a president. Zelensky came to London 2 days ago unexpectedly, spoke to both chambers of the House, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and wowed them. He wowed them by praising Boris.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, your country has some turmoil as well. It's interesting. Your parliament and your PM is very similar to our House of Representatives. There's no checks on anybody. There's really not. We have well, I guess you want to call it checks. We have the court, we have the executive branch, the president, and then we have the Congress. You guys just seem to only have the House of Representatives, which can be very entertaining because they're all a little crazy, and then they elect the House, like we had our problems with our House Speaker and 13 tries. It's very similar to what you have. So you end up with a lot of characters.
Yes. I actually, the most powerful unit in the whole of the United Kingdom political setup is the House of Commons. I mean, they have huge power. But as you know, our opposition system is rather more competitive than yours. And when President Nixon was in power, he visited London, and he was invited into a very, very special seat. Most people don't know about it, but there is a seat at the back of the chamber, because nobody can go onto the floor of the House of Commons except for MPs. And there is this little place which is just outside the bar, the mace, as it were, of power, where a special guest can sit so they can actually get the feel of what it's like in this cockpit of. And he was invited there, and he sat there, and after 10 minutes, he said to his aides, "Get me out of here, get me out of here," and was heard to say as he stormed out, "We are never going to have that sort of attack on the president in the United States of America."
But now you're starting to see that there's a lack of civility. It's very childish. It's just childish behavior. We can't call it anything else. It's me.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak. I'm going to call you a liar. I'm going to scream at you. I'm going to have a big fight with you on the floor. I'm going to beat you up like on the playground. Come on, guys. Let's grow up.
You see, that's where it comes from. We train these people in the really public schools like Eton and Harrow and so on, where to belong to the debating society is something of an honor. Is to behave like that. Now, you see, Winston Churchill claimed that it was one of the.
You still talk, Melissa?
Yes, I still got Melissa. Yes.
Yeah, hello. I simply say how we're lucky we're in the old style, everything in New York, very modern, everything big monstrosity. His proper history, like this hotel. It's lovely, everything cold. I like old style. You lovely old style. Yeah, lovely old.
I mean, Churchill very much believed in the style of government which we had and still have. And after the war, when the chamber was bombed, the modernists said, now is an opportunity for us to make it a proper chamber and where we can have proper debate and so on. And he said, no, under no circumstances. It will be rebuilt the way that we've always had it, the cockpit, where we can enter into the competitive nature of debate. And such was his power and his authority, that's the way it was built. Back the way it was.
Right. I just, to me, that the way the House has been conducting itself is very inefficient. Things don't get done. 13 votes for a speaker? All that time you wasted? Why are we paying them? Like, I don't know. Why are we paying them? And they want to cut the budget? Okay. No salaries for you. You're just there for the fun of it. And no health care. There you go. We've just cut the budget.
Yes. Yeah.
There you go. Sounds good to me. Because what they want to do is they want to cut aid to the poor, aid to the elderly, Social Security. These are the things they want to cut. Cut your own first. Always cut yourself first.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. That's not going to happen with us. You see, that's why I say we're in a me generation. You may not have noticed it. 2 days ago, the MPs have now proposed that when they lose their seat, that they are given a departing fee of £150,000, which is $200,000, and that they will be given a medal for the time that they've served.
How about we give them a kick in the bum?
I absolutely agree with you. But I mean, sometimes you have to determine, is it the people in the system or is it the system? I'm not so sure that our system is so bad. I mean, I'm a great fan of the Constitutional Party.
I think people are crazy.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Keith, it's 6 o'clock. I'm gonna have to go to work.
Right, it's 11 o'clock here, and it's time for us to actually cut off our program. Lovely to have you again.
Great
I'll
having you too.
probably be in touch with you in the week because I'm very anxious to get the beer program going.
Wonderful. Very good. Yay. Okay, Keith, have a wonderful
Okay.
weekend.
And you have a nice day at work.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Darling, bye.
Oh yeah, because I did stay in a place in Lewis. I think it's shut down now. It was
Okay, there we are.
there where that
We had,
sculpture is, you know,
I've been.
Was it the Crown? Yeah. Oh my God, that was so scary. I didn't sleep.
I got two beautiful ladies in here in the bar. I've just done away with one in New York. What a morning it's been! Wow.
I'm just hearing about the ghosts moving furniture.
Ah. Yeah.
They don't do any housework. That's the sort of ghost I'd like.
Create housework, I think. All right. Well, before we get totally carried away here, I think that we need to depart. It's been a Friday. It's been a good Friday. We've enjoyed ourselves, and hopefully we've both entertained you, and we've informed you. We've upset you, made you want to throttle us, because we do pride ourselves on the fact that we're quirky. This is a quirky television station. Some people like it, some people hate it. But like Marmite, you never forget us. Until Monday, this is Keith Hayes from Mirador Television from the White Hart Hotel in Lewis saying toodle pip.
Thank you.